Aotearoa, welcome whānau to Bombers Blog, the War on News, your weekly sacred cow slaughtering assault on current affairs beamed live from the palatial Stratos news bunker buried deep beneath the heart of the Greyland Republic. In tonight's political media crimes against reason kill zone, National starts to regurgitate the dead rats they swallowed to win the election. Ooh. Don Brash awakens from his cryogenic chamber fueled by the tears of orphans. Business Roundtable warns that Maori solo mothers are a worse threat to New Zealand than AIDS, swine flu, terrorism and boy races combined. Plus this week's Wanko of the Week and the Barack Obama People's Hero Award. Leading the war on news this week, brothers and sisters, hands up who thinks the decision to send former National Party candidate Paul Henry to interview Helen Clark at the UN is like sending Bill O'Reilly to MC Barack Obama's inauguration ceremony. Paul Henry has attacked Helen Clark and the UN more than the exclusive brethren, Leighton Smith and the Aryan nation combined. What's more believable? Paul Henry's sincerity congratulating Helen Clark on a UN appointment, or Clayton Weatherston's defensive provocation? Talking of defending the indefensible, Treasury Secretary John Whitehead replaced the New Zealand Listener as the official mouthpiece of the government last week by announcing that when John Key said he'd cap the public sector, he really meant kneecap the public sector. The rats National had to swallow to win the election are being regurgitated now with a mass privatisation agenda quietly being worked on by all those corporate lobbyists who have those after-hour keys to ministers' offices. And about bloody time! Whānau, you can't ram through the holy free market trinity of privatisation, deregulation and massive cuts to social spending without being a little Machiavellian. The Tony Soprano intellectual godfather of the free market delusion was Milton Friedman. His puritanical brand of ideological corporatisation became known as the Chicago School of Economics. Uncle Milton was a bright guy. He pointed out that democracies wouldn't willingly hand over all the social assets that their great-great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-grandparents, grandparents, parents and they themselves had built up over generations of taxation. Uncle Milton argued that the right would have to use shock and awe tactics to ram through these changes before society could fight back. He suggested bringing in rabid free market principles when a country was in shock from a natural disaster, terrorist attack or CIA-sponsored coup. Iraq and the economic rape Bremer committed there with mass deregulation and privatisation that stripped Iraq of all its resources, using Katrina as a catalyst in New Orleans to destroy public education with privatised schools and allowing the mercenary corporation Blackwater to rort relief money by providing security. The brutal mass deregulation of Chile under Pinochet, Brazil under Branco, Iran under the Shah and Indonesia under Suharto all bear fruit from Friedman's gospel that mass privatisation of services, zero social spending, tax cuts and deregulation could only occur in a democracy in the wake of a deep shock. Which leads us back to New Zealand and National's announcement of more foreign corporate ownership. While Kiwis reel from the global economic crisis and the spectre of 10% unemployment, National and their tail that wags the dog, ACT, are preparing the ground to utilise this recession shock to walk the same crazy free market path that wacky old Uncle Milton has prescribed. For those annoying folk who won't go along with this agenda of recasting society for the benefit of corporations, National is streamlining the court process to resemble an abattoir conveyor belt, expanding the prison nation and greenlighting new police powers that come at the cost of our civil liberties. Naomi Klein calls this disaster capitalism. I call it common sense. Brothers and sisters, before National and ACT came to power, we had to put up with that wicked witch of the left, Helen Clark, and her stormtroopers from the nanny state, who were constantly kicking down our front doors to force energy-efficient light bulbs and water-saving shower heads down our throats. What an outrageous indignity! Thank God we now have a multi-millionaire merchant banker prime minister who profited from this fundamentalist capitalism to guide us through these troubling times. Uncle Friedman isn't with us any longer. Sadly, he died 3 years ago. I like to think he's in a purpose-built groundhog multi-replay hell, working as a below minimum wage waiter, forced to serve Marx and Lenin in an Amsterdam cafe owned by Che Guevara, where after hours he gets kicked to death by the millions of human lives he ruined with his failed economic policies. Far now, we have to move on. Waking from his cryogenic chamber that is sustainably fueled by the tears of orphans, Milton Friedman wannabe and Montgomery Burns lookalike, Dr. Don Brash has been resurrected and appointed to chair a task force to advise government on how to close the productivity gap with Australia by 2025. Two things about this appointment. One, why appoint someone to catch up with Australia by 2025 when odds are he won't be alive in 2025? Don Brash is old. He is so old the first time he heard about Australia, it was still a penal colony. Don Brash is so old, he predates Aboriginal migration. Don Brash is so old, the last time he was in Australia, it was part of the Gondwana supercontinent. Appointing a person to make decisions they won't be responsible for is like taking investment advice from a suicidal Bernie Madoff. Far out, the second thing Don's appointment raises is the question why someone who led one of the most racist campaigns in modern New Zealand political history be allowed anywhere near public authority ever again. Don Brash's get too much Orewa speech was aimed at being as racially divisive as possible. It even made Winston Peters blush. Talking racist garbage is one thing, but the rub with Don Brash's Orewa speech was that he and his little spin doctor minions knew that